legendary and longtime matchmaker Ron Katz, currently of Star Boxing. Ron, how you doing?
Doing well. Just chilling like everybody else, waiting to get back in action.
So what have you been up to? I mean, obviously you've been doing this for the better part of, say, I don't know, 40 years, and this is probably the longest break that you've ever had.
No doubt about it. It's very unusual after being in action constantly, on the phone constantly, for a long, long time, and then have everything come to a screeching halt. It was a little weird getting adjusted to it. I'm still not adjusted to it. I want to be in action, and God willing, we'll be in action pretty soon.
Gotcha.
Excuse me.
So what have you been doing? I mean, you had a chance.
Watching a lot of TV.
Watching a lot of TV. I mean,
doing podcasts like yours.
There you go. Okay. Have you gotten any indication? I know you're in New York. Obviously, people are watching the TV, and when restrictions. Is there anything that I know that you and Joe DeGuardia? I'm sure you guys have been on the phone and whatnot. Anything that you guys, any plans or anything that you guys can do?
Well, we rely on fans at the Paramount, so that won't happen until Phase 4. Which will probably, hopefully, be, in the fall, late fall. Then there's shows at resorts in upstate New York, which may come sooner. But, right now we're just in a holding pattern, and then you have to go through all the COVID protocols that are going to be in place, which is not easy. So...
I guess your phone's probably been ringing off the hook with your fighters asking the same questions.
Well, funnily enough, it really hasn't. They understand the situation. They're being patient just like the rest of us. So we'll see what happens in the hopefully near future. Hopefully.
Okay, so obviously let's get into some more happier topics. A lot of people, I mean, everyone in the business knows you, and your reputation as a matchmaker, speaks for itself. Let's talk a little bit about how and when you started matchmaking, and what piqued your interest in doing that.
Well, I was working for Lou Falsino, who was one of the pioneers with Barry Bernstein of the closed circuit era, and we were based in White Plains, New York, and Lou decided he wanted to run shows at the county center, which was a very famous building in White Plains that had boxing, for many, many years back in the golden era. One thing led to another, and the short version is that I went from a gopher to start making matches. Johnny Baz took me under his wing, sort of taught me the ropes at the beginning, and then I met Bruce Strampler, and eventually worked with Teddy Brenner, the greatest of them all. So that's how it sort of evolved, and I learned from all those guys. I really did a tremendous amount, especially Johnny.
Well, before we get into the top rank years, which I know there's definitely a lot we could talk about, any fighters of note during the first incarnation with the first group that you work with? Any notable fighters that you helped build up, or any famous?
Oh yeah, sure. Two to speak of: Ronaldo Snipes and Doug DeWitt.
So you brought Snipes to the Holmes fight.
Yes, I actually worked his corner that night.
Oh wow! So
I carried the bucket.
I can only imagine what went through you when that right hand landed in round 7.
We all thought the fight was over. We all thought it was a little bit of a long count, so to speak, or referee Rudy Ortega gave Larry more time than was allowed. But Ronaldo came close.
What when he gets the Holmes fight, it's. What goes through your mind, being you're the guy who got him the right fights, helped build him, and brought him to boxing's biggest prize, the heavyweight championship of the world. I mean, do you quietly pat yourself on the back for that?
No, because to be honest with you, I wasn't educated enough at that time.
Oh, wow.
I was still learning. So, and there were other people I made some of his matches. Basically, I didn't, make the Holmes fight. Obviously it was part of the team, but I really was still learning at that phase of my career. It's not until I hooked up with Bob Spagnola and HBA and Jeff Levine where I really delved big time into matchmaking on a much larger scale, which then led to Top Rank, which then led to Sugar Ray Leonard Boxing, which then led to Star Boxing.
Okay, so let's so you go from Lou Falsino's group in White Plains to
Right. I also worked with Butch Lewis at that time too, with the Spinks brothers, Greg Page, Roger Stafford, a couple other guys.
Now
but
was
not necessarily as their matchmaker, but more as like an operations kind of person.
But it's still very young in your boxing career. You helped get a guy to the heavyweight championship. Doug DeWitt, I believe, became the WBO middleweight champion later.
Yeah.
And
that's
then,
a little different because it had a lot to do with his career. And at that time, I was, fully entrenched into the matchmaking end of it. So that was a little different than Snipes. A lot more involvement with Doug. And
then when you're working with Butch, I guess Michael was already the light heavyweight champion.
Michael, this was coming out of the Olympics.
Okay.
Michael wasn't at that time.
Okay.
Nor was Leon. We had Leo Randolph. We all had them up in White Plains. A bunch of them stayed at my mom's house. Greg Page, Michael,
wow,
Roger Stafford, Leo Randolph. They were all on a show. Michael wasn't on it. Michael was on it. I'm sorry. Leon wasn't on it.
Wow. So, you must...
That was early in their careers.
You must have some stories alone just from, these young fighters living in your house.
Yeah, well, I kind of bonded with Leon because I was, crazy and wild and doing all kinds of crazy things. So he and I bonded and, we had some good times together.
I know he's not been in great health. Have you heard from Leon Spinks at all?
No. I saw Michael, a couple months ago. We all know the situation with Leon. He's hanging on, which I guess, thank God he's doing that. And, that's basically all I know.
So then, like you just said, you go to HBA and you become a real, like you use the word entrenched.
All of a sudden, I went, from making a show here and there to doing, 5 shows a month.
Now, what fighters of note would you've worked with in that outfit?
The main guy at that time was Frank Tate. Bob Spagnola thought he had all the guys that ended up signing with Main Events signed to them. If you remember correctly, Evander, Purnell, Mark Breland.
Oh, wow.
But they ended up going with Main Events at the last minute. But Frank Tate was the torchbearer. The Canizales brothers, Orlando and Gabby, both became world champions.
And these are guys you built from scratch, from 0-0.
Tate, yes. The other two, no. But I had involvement in a lot of matches. Then I was bringing guys in like Calvin Grove, who I, led to a title.
Coatesville, PA.
Joe Manley, who actually was the first champion. He beat Gary Hinton in Connecticut for HBA. So, there were a few.
And then is Top Rank after that?
Top Rank was after that.
Okay, so let's talk about that. How did you hook on with them?
Well, HBA, we were really cranking, but there was friction there at the end, as there was with Sugar Ray Leonard Boxing, and the year was '86, I believe, and Teddy Brenner, Bruce had moved out to Vegas to be with Bob, excuse me, and Teddy was manning the East Coast office, but Teddy was getting up in age and his health was starting to fail a little bit, and Bruce saw what I was doing and what I was accomplishing with HBA, so he told Bob, look, we got to get Katz away from HBA. One, because we need him, and 2, because he can help Teddy out tremendously, and 3, because it'll be the end of HBA, which ultimately it was. So that's how that evolved. It started with the Frank Tate Michael Nunn fight and just went on from there.
It's kind of like when Jordan left the Bulls. When he left the Bulls, they went in the tank. Yeah, I guess I can compare you to Michael Jordan. So you get in. So you run you're the matchmaker for more or less the East Coast part of Top Rank. I know Atlantic City back then was really running strong.
That was the capital.
So to talk about some of your memorable fights in the Atlantic City, New York years of Top Rank.
Yeah, well, it wasn't just that. I mean, everything east of the Mississippi. I mean, we had broken ground in the Biloxi area, when all those casinos popped up. We went into New Orleans, we went all over the place. But, excuse me, there were so many matches, Mark. But, I mean, guys remind me, I'm reading on Twitter and somebody will post something and I'll go, oh, crap, man, I made that fight. What a great fight that was. I didn't even remember. So there's so many like that. One of the memorable ones, or two of them, were the Murky Sosa, Prince Charles Williams fights, both of them. Kevin Pompey, almost any fight he was in. Zach Padilla and Ray Oliveira
that was the punch record, if I'm not mistaken, right?
At the time, yes. Yeah. I don't know if it's ever been broken, but at the time, yes. So that, I mean, there's been so many that, and again, I look at guys post on YouTube, hey guys, look at this fight, and I go, oh crap, then I type in, hey, I made that match. There were, I had a hell of a run. I mean, it's still going, but I mean, for great fights.
I always think matchmakers, they can get too highs, and correct me if I'm wrong here. There are certain matchmakers who just make great fights, and there are other matchmakers who can build a fighter. What? I mean, do you get equal pride in each, or is there one that outweighs the other?
It's a good question, but I think every matchmaker worthy of their salt, meaning, excuse me, guys like Brad Goodman, Bruce Trampler, Russell Peltz,
absolutely,
Don Chargan, the late guys, Teddy Brenner. I think we, ultimately we take the most pride, I think, in making good fights and great fights, memorable fights, but not far behind taking a guy like Bruce did, and I had a very tiny part in it, Oscar De La Hoya, and building him into such a superstar.
How many?
I did it with James Toney. So we both did it with Floyd Mayweather. So there's equal pride, but if you're a real, I mean, I'm from the Teddy Brenner school of matchmaking, and the Russell Peltz is, the same thing. And Teddy always told me, try not to make a fight that you don't want to see yourself.
Exactly.
It doesn't always happen, obviously, but that was the credo I went by and still go by for my career.
So you
still try to make great fights.
So I'm going to ask this because I was a big Michael Nunn fan back in the day. So you're the guy responsible for James Toney and getting Nunn knocked off in that great fight.
Bob, came to me and said, "What do you think?" I told him what I thought. Jackie Callan and James wanted it badly. I told him he's going to knock Nunn out. You're crazy. I said, okay, you'll see. And Bob at the press conference, there were a lot of press there, New York guys, because, they travel. Mike Katz, Wally Matthews, guys like that, they travel. And they said, how did a famous line he used, how did Ron Katz know that James Toney would even have a chance with Michael Nunn? And Bob said, in his, Yiddish way, that's why he makes more than all of you guys.
What were some of the other fighters in the eastern part that you helped develop?
Well, the triple threat made them all world champions. I've developed and worked with somewhere in the neighborhood, between Top Rank, HBA, Star Boxing, Northeast Promotions, Sugar Ray Leonard, somewhere in the neighborhood of 160 world champions. So, I mean, guys I don't remember. You know, like Jake Rodriguez, Freddie Pendleton, guys like that. Zach Padilla.
That's it.
You know, so
some amazing stuff.
There's so many of James Toney, obviously. There's just so many of them.
You said that you had a small hand in with helping mold the early De La Hoya Mayweather years. When they were Olympians and Oscar gold medalists. And I know Matchmakers, they have a hand in signing these fighters out of the Olympics and out of the amateurs. When guys like De La Hoya and especially Mayweather, you're scouting them. What were your impressions of them?
You know, can't miss guys, blue chippers. We almost didn't sign De La Hoya. He almost went with King. Bruce and I were begging Bob Arum. At the time, Robert Middleman and Steve Nelson were his managers, and they wanted a lot of money to sign, and Bob was a little hesitant. But Bruce convinced them.
Wow.
Mayweather was a lot easier to sign, being in Vegas and the connection and everything. So, but we knew they were can't-miss guys.
If I would have told you, when you were looking at a 17, 18-year-old Floyd Mayweather, that, in 20 years he's going to be 50-0 and make X 900, whatever $million, $500 million, what would you have told me?
I would have said that would have been some feat to accomplish at that time, because it's very hard to predict what a fighter's going to do over the body of his work and how much money he's going to make. With a guy like Sugar Ray Leonard was different because he was out there. He was on TV doing commercials with his son. He was America's darling. But Floyd invented himself and became the top attraction of his era, and obviously the best fighter of his era and the highest earner of his era.
I'm going to ask you a two-pronged question here. Which fighter that surprised you the most from like when you got him and then how his career turned out? And if you want to answer this, I don't know if you want to ruffle any feathers. Who's the biggest maybe disappointment that you thought that was going to be this, that, and the other, but maybe never reached that lofty.
Well, I'll tell you on a disappointment, but he did reach very lofty heights, which James Toney. I thought he would be unbeatable his career.
But he was kind of an unheralded guy, so to speak, though, wasn't he? I mean, he was
absolutely. When we signed him, nobody knew who he was. Yeah. When I signed him with Jackie Callan, nobody knew who he was. But he went off the bandwagon and became nuts, and the money got to him, and he wanted to do what he wanted. To this day, I still think that he could have beaten Roy Jones if he would have prepared himself the way he should have. So that was a major disappointment. Guy like Jake Rodriguez was a solid club fighter. No frills, became a world champion. Freddie Pendleton, the same thing, became a world champion. Those are the kind of guys that you least expected to become a world champion, and they became one. So, I'm sure there's others in there, but, those two come to mind very quickly.
So then after Top Rank...
I'll tell you who was a very big disappointment. There were two twins out of Philly. I'm sure you're going to know them, Eric and Aaron Mitchell.
Know them well, yep.
On their way up, early on, Arum loved them. We thought both of them can't miss world champions. Can't miss. Carmen Graziano was training them. They look sensational every single fight. But they were twins, and they share a brain. So that prevented them from becoming something special, because they went off the wagon too. And another guy who was unexpected to become a world champion, ended up doing better than I thought he'd do, was Bruce Seldon.
There you go.
I thought he was a good, solid guy, but I never thought he'd become a world champion. Especially after the Oliver McCall fight.
And if I'm not mistaken, because the time frame you're talking about, I know even though he wasn't signed, I don't think he was signed to a promoter, but Mike Tyson, he fought on a lot of those Top Rank shows in Atlantic City. No. Okay.
I made some. I forgot what the count was. My last involvement with Tyson was the Marvis Frazier fight.
Okay.
His first 5 or 6 fights were with Top Rank.
Yeah.
And a couple independents. I don't know what happened. I never heard the story, the accurate story. whether there was a difference of opinions. This is when I was with HBA. Jim Jacobs called Jeff Levine because he knew we had 5 shows a month, and he wanted a promoter that he could control that would give Mike the activity. Brought him to HBA. So I made many, many, many of Mike's fights on his way up with the aid of Johnny Boss.
I see some comments here in the queue. Joe Body said you almost took Butterbean to the top. So talk about working with Butterbean.
Butterbean's a great guy. I mean, Art Dorr, Murray Sutherland, the best. They're salt of the earth, these guys. But, I mean, Butterbean, I'm clicking on the chat. How come I can't see the chat?
It's on the Facebook. It's on my Facebook page.
Oh, okay. Butterbean was obviously, a little better than a novelty because, he had a little bit of skill and he trained and he tried, he climbed through the ropes. You got to give anybody who climbs through the ropes credit that tries. But, probably the worst moment of my career was, the Mitch Rose fight, which, was unexpected. And, that started the downward spiral of my time with Top Rank.
Okay, so then you moved on to Northeast Promotions?
Yeah, Walt Lambert for a couple years. Well, no, I went from Top Rank. I took a year off because Bob was very generous and gave me an unbelievable severance package where I could just take it easy. I did a couple things on my own with James Toney, with Dana Rosenblatt. That was a disappointment too. The first Pazienza fight.
Oh, so you were involved
so
with that,
and then he got clipped.
That's when.
But the last one was great.
That's what the first one.
The rematch that Jimmy Birchfield and I did at Foxwoods. I think that was a high.
And that was an ESPN show, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
The first one was on pay-per-view. I actually bought that.
TVKO.
Yep, and that's when Pazienza almost knocked out the referee right after he knocked out. So you mentioned, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Delvin Rodriguez was the guy that you kind of helped develop at Northeast Promotions.
Delvin, I was with almost his entire career.
And he followed you to top to star.
It's one of those who is very close to my heart because I made maybe 98% of his fights. And Delvin, was a real good, solid fighter, good action fighter. Was never the same fighter after the Oscar Diaz fight. That affected him greatly.
I can imagine.
But, Delvin was in some classic fights like with Powell Wallach, and appeared on ESPN, double-digit numbers of times. Jesse Feliciano, he got licked. We had that was my first fight with Star Boxing.
Oh God!
And we had signed Delvin, and Feliciano stopped him in a great fight. But Delvin was a warrior, but never the same after Oscar Diaz.
As you mentioned, with Star Boxing, now working with our good friend Joe DeGuardia. You've developed some good, Chris Algieri, Cletus Selden, Joe Smith. You got Vinny Matalone. He, fought in.
Well, Vinny, was with Joe long before me, but I made about 4 or 5 Vinny's fights. Okay. He never lost in a fight I made.
Okay.
And don't forget Demetrius Andrade. I did his whole, Eric Botcher and I, made all his matches, Absolutely. Until, most recently, the last year or two.
So talk about, you bringing a guy like Algieri, who is known as a great ticket seller in Huntington, New York at the Paramount, and you got him undefeated, and you got the Provodnikov fight, and me and you will differ on that fight, but what's it?
He won the fight.
Oh yeah, Ruslan did. Anyway,
no, he didn't.
Like I said, we'll differ on that. But
no, he didn't. I'll watch the fight with you, and you honestly tell me that Provodnikov won.
All right, well,
looked like he was.
We could do a live watch along. We can do that and have the fans.
Okay.
We
can
do that.
Start without me. Just let me know.
So the first.
Listen, as far as accomplishments you asked earlier, that kind of went over my head. Guys like Algieri. I mean, here was a kid nobody wanted. I mean, nobody wanted. Joe signed him. I made all his matches. When he came to Star Boxing, he had a few fights, not many. And he ends up fighting Manny Pacquiao for crazy money, and then goes on and fights, like a murderer's row of guys. I mean, Amir Khan. Errol Spence. One thing about Chris, he doesn't say no to fights.
You talked about the Paramount in Huntington, New York. It's become not only a great place to watch a fight, an awesome atmosphere because there's never an open seat in that place, but it's become a real breeding ground for fighters with Algieri, with Joe Smith, and some other guys.
Cletus Selden, yeah.
Cletus Selden. Talk about that, having that outlet to be able to really develop kids not only as local attractions, but of course graduating onto the bigger stage.
Well, that is something very difficult to do because when I'm with Top Rank HBA, we have TV. It's easy, it's easy to make great fights and get blue chip fighters. But to be with a secondary promoter, it's tougher to get blue chippers to come. So you have to be selective who you take, and then you have to put on the kind of fights that's going to entertain the fans so they come back, yet hope that your fighter wins. And I was lucky enough to do that with those three guys at the Paramount.
And talk about the atmosphere of that place. Obviously, I've been there. I broadcasted many fights there. The atmosphere of that place.
It's to me the best club around. I mean, I likened it, in atmosphere to the Blue Horizon. It's it's a little more upscale, but it has that look and that feel. The fans are great. They're knowledgeable. They're appreciative even of outside fighters. So, you can't ask for anything more from a club venue.
You know what I like? I like that that you filter the card is littered with Long Island guys. Talk about Long Island as a it's kind of an underrated breeding ground for fighters. Long Island.
Well, yeah, I mean, Long Island's always had a tradition of having some decent guys. The Cassidys, the Capabiancos, obviously Jerry Cooney. More recently now, Algieri, Joe Smith, Cletus Selden. So Anthony Carperas, who was one of our major attractions. Johnny Hernandez, another big attraction there. So, I mean, having a club like the Paramount sends a message to these kids who may be on the fence. Well, do I want to do this or don't I want to do it? To be able to do it and perform in front of their family and friends. So that's, and you just hope that one of them clicks, like an Algieri, like a Joe Smith, like a Selden.
Well, I know you have several young fighters who, around the 8-0, 10-0 mark. Which one or two you think has a chance to become the next Algieri or Smith?
Well, not necessarily Algieri or Smith, but Tyrone James has shown a lot of promise. Unfortunately, we've been derailed now by the pandemic like everybody else.
Yeah.
But he was starting to become, a bit of a prospect that you might take notice of. And he has a ton of charisma. So if he evolved and his skills evolved with him, he could do very, very well for himself. Because it's rare when you have a fighter who has, great skills and a lot of charisma, like a Sugar Ray Leonard. So when you can parlay those two, you can maximize the kind of money you can make.
So you see him possibly getting to that next level in the sense that, you will see him in some 10-round fights against some very known guys.
Yeah, I mean, he has that potential.
Gotcha.
He has, his skill level is such that he has that potential.
Got about 10, 15 minutes left, so let's delve into some...
Why so long?
Well, I said, well, we can shut it off now. I'm only kidding. Let's. I just want to dive into a couple topics. Talk about the state of the game now. Obviously, you have been through a couple different eras of the game, the such that what was going on in the mid '80s, the '90s, the early 2000s. Now we're 2020. What's your opinion on the state of the game right now?
Well, I mean, the state of the game is at a standstill because nobody has ever experienced in their lifetimes what we're going through now.
Mm-hmm.
So,
what about before
remains
this?
To be seen.
Well, what about before this happened? Where did you think boxing was at?
I thought the game was thriving. I mean, you had the Zone, ESPN. PBC on Fox. So, I mean, there was a lot out there, a lot of good fighters, a lot of good fights, a lot of potentially big fights that would have happened. But now this pandemic has brought everybody to the knees. Top Rank just started out Tuesday, have a show tonight.
Mm-hmm.
God willing, PBC will be soon. Get back in actions. They have a bunch of great fighters that people want to see. And then when you move, Eddie Hearn, is talking about getting up and running Golden Boy, obviously, people want to see their fighters. And then, you have promoters like Star Boxing, Lou DiBella, and all the rest of us that want to get back to doing our live boxing to hopefully build stars where we compete with some of these other companies.
What do you think? I know Tuesday night was the first one, and I've watched several UFC shows. Fights with no fans. Talk about that. It
didn't really bother me.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, boxing is the kind of sport that needs the excitement of fans, present. But when you're going through what we're all going through, even though there's no fans, it's something welcome to be able to watch it on TV.
Yeah, I thought
today I was watching golf. It's their first tournament back, and they have no fans, and it didn't bother me.
Yeah,
one bit.
That's a sport where, I don't, the fans. I don't know how much of a difference. Maybe like the Masters on Sunday or something like that. But other than that, because I watch some of the golf too.
Well, I was a golfer, a big-time golfer, so, I enjoy watching it, but you can only watch it for so long.
I thought, like I said, I watched all the UFC fights. Once the fight started, and like the other night, I think once the fight started, I didn't really think about that there was no fans.
Yeah, no, I agree. Kind of block it out and, looking at the two fighters, what's going on in the ring.
Obviously, some news came out yesterday that there's a possible agreement for a Fury and Joshua, two fights for 2021 should they get by their next fights. What are your thoughts on that? Should those two, the big English guys, meet up?
Well, obviously, for the European fans and for American fans, but more for them, that's a fight that everybody would like to see. But, there's obstacles in the way and guys have to, fight other guys before they get to it. So, when they actually get in the ring, that's when I'll get excited.
I think Wilder will be better this fight of the third fight against Fury. I actually think the pandemic helps him, believe it or not.
Yes, Deontay, yes.
Because it's going to give him some time to.
Don't ever count out Deontay Wilder.
Just some quick questions. Spence and Crawford. You think that they will ever meet, and who would you like right now if they fought?
Well, listen. Before his accident, I wouldn't pick against Errol Spence, and I love Terrence Crawford. Do I think they'll meet eventually? Yes. And I just pray that Spence is what he was before his accident.
Well, it looks like he's going to fight Danny Garcia, but before
that's a possibility. I've heard that.
What other fighters out there? Maybe some under the rocks. I know you watch everything. Under the radar guys. You say keep an eye on this guy. You put your matchmakers head on with that.
The kid out of New York, Top Rank, has Edward Berlanga. Is my kind of guy. Tremendous puncher. He's a guy to keep an eye on.
It's funny. I interviewed Tyrone Brunson a couple weeks ago. He's actually praying for Berlanga to break his first round knockout streak. He's like, let him do it. So I'm like, why wouldn't you want why wouldn't you want your name still be in the record book? Because
listen, that's pretty magnanimous of them.
So
but there's a lot of great young fighters out there, so we'll see what happens.
Okay, well, we just did 35 good minutes with Ron Katz.
About 33 too much.
That's all right. Well, first of all, congratulations on being inducted into the Atlantic City Hall of Fame. I'll let
you too.
I'll let you speak after me.
Okay.
So now
that's fine, because you ain't a tough act to follow.
You mentioned Al Cole; he's going in this year. What's it like to go in with like you said, a guy that you helped build? Is that
great? I think Calvin Grove is going in too, right?
Yes, he is. Yeah. So
I mean that's thrilling. It's thrilling for me.
So it's kind of, I mean,
very proud of him.
And not that you need any affirmation of your credentials, but it's pretty cool that you get to go in with a couple guys that you helped get them there as well.
Yes, sir. Be a lot of fun.
Well, anything you want to say in closing, Ron, before we let you go?
Bye.
Well, hold on. I asked this to everyone before I go. If people want to follow you on social media, and you're pretty active on Twitter, where can they find you?
RK Matchmaker.
There he is, the great Ron Katz. This is, I don't know if this is a career highlight or low light for me, but I'll have to figure that out.
We both know it's neither.
Ron,
all right, you stay well, and everybody else stay well. We hope to see you real soon back at the fights.
And when you have some fights, we'll get you back on. Maybe we'll preview one of your shows when we get you back.
Okay, great.